Jack Russell here with the AfterGeeks.com, and I'm at Anime USA 2017. And I am joined by a very special guest, Lisle Wilkerson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, thank you so much for meeting with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so number one, thanks for joining us, but number two, thank you for having such an awesome social media handle.
Oh, Lisle Weapon.
Lisle
you like that?
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's such a cool name.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think it clarified. Initially, I was like, "Oh, how is the name pronounced?" I'm not really sure, and then it really clears it up when you.
You know, it's funny you say that because I still have so many problems with my name. Even though they see the email address and everything, and they're still like, Lisle, Leslie. I'm like, whatever. Yeah.
Are you actually a fan of the movies, like the Lethal Weapon movies, or do you have a favorite one?
No, actually, the Lisle Weapon moniker, I can't say that I was the one that came up with it. Okay. So I first, and this will kind of give a little bit of my background as well, but I first started working in radio at the age of 18, 19 in Tokyo. And the person that I worked for, he was my first boss. He was in charge of the Monday through Friday morning show. His name is John Kabira. And he's the one that came up with that. So every morning, and I'm not good with mornings, like super early mornings. Sure. His show started at 7 a.m., and went till 10, right? So it was like a 3-hour show, Monday through Friday. Sure. And I had to be there usually about 5:45. Right, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what I said.
I know there was an aim of that.
Yeah. And so every morning I would get to the radio station, and he'd be like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, but that's how I wake up every morning. Yeah. So he's the one that actually came up with that. Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir, for the great name.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to ask you about the convention since we're here. What's been your favorite part about Anime USA so far?
One of the really cool things. So I haven't really gotten to meet a lot of the congoers yet. Mm-hmm. Only a few of them, but. A lot of the guests that are here I've never met either.
Sure.
Which is, I was just telling one of the other guests, earlier, but, I go to quite a few conventions throughout the year. So to not know a lot of the guests is kind of, for me, it was really exciting. Because I was like, oh my gosh,
the awesome. Element of mystery.
So, so it was a lot of fun. But I think the content here is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to that. And I love coming to the East Coast, and I haven't been to the East Coast in a while for a convention, so I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah.
No, that's a great segue into that was literally my next question. Do you come to the East Coast often? Because we know you're based out of the West Coast, and you're from Tokyo actually. So,
correct. Yeah. I come sometimes, but usually if I do, it's usually like New York or something like that. Because I do a lot of interpreting work, so a lot of times I'll interpret for clients there. So I'll be in New York. Mm-hmm. And also I have two of my best friends live in New York, so I'll go hang out. But I haven't been to Washington, D.C. in a while, so it's exciting.
Yeah. So speaking of, interpreting and translating, so what is, in your opinion, the hardest part about translating and interpreting between English and Japanese?
Well, first of all, the sentence structure is completely different, so that kind of makes it a lot harder, especially because there are two forms of interpreting that you can do. There's consecutive and simultaneous, and I do both. And simultaneous interpreting can be crazy, especially if the person talks really fast. And, but you still, it doesn't matter. Like, you still have to wait just because Japanese, you have to flip around the sentence,
Absolutely.
Right? So you kind of lose a little bit of time there. Mm-hmm. And then also sometimes the nuances, like the really small nuances that it's hard to explain, both in English and Japanese sometimes. So you kind of have to talk around it in order to kind of get them to understand.
Sure.
But then at the end of the day, though, probably the biggest thing is the terminology, right? Because when you're interpreting, a lot of times it's for a conference or, like for simultaneous interpreting, I do for focus groups. So it's always a very specific, industry jargon that I'm working with. And, you kind of read up on it, but you only have a few days to read up on it. Whereas they've been in this business for years,
the pros
So,
at it,
and I've taught a lot of seminars for people who want to be interpreters, right? And one thing I've always told them, though, is that at the end of the day, you're never going to know everything you want to know. Everything you think you should know, you're not going to know. So you need to understand that. And if you don't understand something, you need to go ahead and ask. Like, don't just sit there and be like, oh my gosh, I can't ask what that is. Or,
absolutely.
And you can. So it's okay. So.
Yeah, I always kind of wonder how they get anything done at like the UN when everyone's trying to translate and they're shouting over each other. So.
Yeah, and actually he is 2 years senior to me, but he is interpreter for the UN.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, Paul Hershey is his name, but incredible, interpreter. And with that, of course, you have all your training and everything. So I'm not in a way saying it's easy, because it's obviously not easy, but at least you are in a specific industry, more or less. So it's kind of easier. Whereas if you're doing all kinds of interpreting, I could be doing it for like a really big anime creator or something one day, but then the next day I'm doing it for a labor union, conference.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, crazy. Yeah. So, but it makes life interesting. That's for sure.
So speaking of your career, so many big things here. You've been in Tekken, you've been in Dead or Alive, and I see Shenmue 2 and Crazy Taxi and stuff. I've played a lot of these games. And they're so great. What would you say to someone that wants to become, a voice actor or actress?
Yeah.
A little boy or girl that wants to be the next, Lisle Wilkerson. What advice would you have for them?
I think it's really important to understand that no one's journey is ever the same. I never thought that I would take the journey that I've taken so far, and I'm so grateful. At the end of the day, I probably might have done things a little bit differently, but I'm glad that I was not. I think that we're in some way we're in charge of our own path, but then I think in many other ways we're not. So have faith in who you are and just kind of be really committed if you wanted to do something. But then at the same time, also there are going to be things that are going to be thrown your way, which has happened to me, like with voice acting for video games. Like, I started off doing radio, and that was the only thing that I thought I was ever going to do, and I loved it, and I still love it. But then I got offered, to be in video games and stuff like that, and that took a whole different turn that I never even expected. So I think that's always really important to kind of look at these other things that you might not necessarily think of in the first place, but you just never know where things are going to go, right? And never say never, I always tell people.
Sure.
Yeah, because that's happened in my life so many times. So.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned you started off in radio. So what inspired this particular... this fork in the road, what inspired you to take this path? Are you a fan of, have you always been a fan of like gaming and anime and stuff like that? Growing up in Tokyo, you have a very interesting perspective of having both sides of America and Japan.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know if I didn't really do it because I was a fan or anything. It was more like, in some ways it was very similar because in radio you are also creating a world with music and with your voice, and you're creating connection with listeners when you're on the radio.
Sure.
And so it was kind of an extension to do that, with someone else's, what they wrote and what they created, but I got to still use my voice as the vehicle. So it was kind of similar in that way. And I think that was what intrigued me about voice acting. That's probably why I wanted to do it. Now, I do enjoy, there are quite a few anime shows that are really old school that probably no one knows, but that, I watched growing up, like Candy Candy. I was a huge fan. Attack Number One, which is like a volleyball anime.
Sure.
And that was huge. And I was in volleyball for years because of that,
Oh,
actually.
yeah.
Yes.
Very nice.
And then also, there's another one called Ace o Nerai, which means to aim for an ace. And
Sure.
I think it's called Prince of Ace, or I don't know. It was over here, I think, in the U.S. But so I grew up on all those anime. So I did definitely grow up with anime, but it wasn't the reason that I got into the voice acting, though.
Yeah, absolutely. So you must have a vast, knowledge of just, the anime and stuff in the U.S., but also Japan. I kind of wanted to ask, on the Japan side, how is the U.S. in particular, or Western culture, portrayed to, Japanese people? Like Hideo Kojima is very, inspired by Western culture, and that shows through in his work, and then it might, to a Japanese consumer, seem one way, So, can you speak to a little bit of how Japanese view Western or U.S. culture through anime?
Yeah, I think that there's still, and maybe the younger generation might be looking at things a little bit differently now, but I would say that everyone from like 30s up still thinks of like all the portrayals that they see in movies and TV shows and music. That's really how they get a lot of their America images,
Sure,
So like the blonde, like even Candy, which is an anime that I watched, she's blonde, big eyes. And so, they still have that image for Americans, right? But I do think that that's kind of starting to change because there's so much more access now to, but it still is a very insular country in many ways.
Sure.
So, and I was just in Tokyo until like a few days ago, and I've noticed that there's kind of a new generation of tourists there, like or not even just tourists, but like people who live there, like a younger generation, which I found interesting. And I talked to someone else who also grew up in Tokyo, and I said, I'm feeling like there's kind of almost like this YouTube like generation. Like a lot of these people, I think, are now living in Japan, and it's just kind of it's just a different dynamic, I think, and I found that really interesting. And then, of course, with the Olympics coming up,
right?
Like a lot of people,
a
lot of people are going over there and everything. But yes, so I think, and then you also have the older generation, like who the taxi drivers and everything, and they still think of America as Motown and Elvis Presley and like all the golden years, right? Depending on that generation, you have a different image, I think, for American.
Absolutely. So I think briefly, since we're short on time, this will be the last question.
Okay.
So you were mentioning access for the younger generation.
Yes.
So how have you seen social media? It can be a force for good, or it can be very toxic.
Yes.
How has it negatively or positively influenced your life and career?
Well, I would, I'll first talk about actually how social media, it was positive, very positive thing. And it was actually for the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Absolutely, yeah.
When I first moved to Japan, I was 5 years old, and I lived in Sendai, which is the northern part of Japan. And that is the epicenter of where the earthquake tsunami was, right? So, and I just remember I was in Denver, and I was there for an anime convention. And me and some of my high school friends, we all usually get together like twice a year. We all went to high school together in Tokyo and everything, right? So, and so we were all congregating in Denver that weekend. And then, and we were, drinking and having fun and getting caught up. And then I got, a little alert, a CNN alert or something, and it said, earthquake in Japan, and I told everyone. Well, but the thing is, I was talking to you about it later, but we get earthquakes all the time, right? So it's kind of not a big deal. So I was like, yeah, whatever, not a big deal.
The earthquake that cried wolf.
Yeah, but then, and then of course we had been drinking, so and then I woke up at like 3 or 4 in the morning. I just had this feeling, I didn't know what, and I just thought, I cannot go back to bed, like something's going on. And so I checked my Facebook, and it was crazy, like all the video and everything that everyone saw with tsunami, like we just saw it over and over. And sorry, so anyway, so long story short is Twitter was always the big social media device used in Japan because it's much more. It's short, and you don't need to be as personal with it,
It gets to the point,
Yeah, and that's why Japanese quickly picked up Twitter. Facebook, some people use Facebook, but not so much. But then Twitter completely went down during the earthquake tsunami, and so people were having a hard time trying to reach other people. And me and a big group of people that I know in Tokyo who are also media, we started using our status updates and for me, it started off with one of the girls I went to elementary school with. She couldn't get a hold of her mom, who lived in Fukushima, right? And so I said, well, Anita, I'm going to put that on my status, if that's okay. And then that way we can start sending that information out to people, and they can start trying to call. And that led to, it was like this really crazy network where I had people contacting me, and they said, I understand that you are doing this, like, I don't know, they thought I had like some underground tunnel network. I don't know what they thought, but I said, no! It was just all very kind of organic and just kind of happened. But that just really moved me because I was able to see like the incredible positive things, which you see a lot in the news, like, with a revolution or, with whatever. But I was actually able to see that in, real life and be a part of it and experience it, which was really cool. Needless to say, Facebook is now much bigger in Japan because of that. So that was really good. But yeah, as far as for me, though, I think that I love social media. And I think that I will say I'm glad that I was older when it came along, because I feel that sometimes maybe the younger generation, they only know a life with social media. And I'm kind of happy that I know the good and the bad. Yeah,
you get both sides of the...
Yeah. So I think for me, I also know that if I need to step back, I can step back, or yeah. So I think it's great. I think it's a great tool.
That's great. That's a positive experience for you. Well, that's all the time we have. It flew by, but I just want to thank you again so much for meeting with us and talking with us. And I hope you have a great rest of Anime USA. So,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.